Each problem is a piece of the puzzle. And when you start talking out loud about what's going on, it's like the puzzle is being put together in front of your eyes. And suddenly the problem has a lot more clarity and makes a lot more sense and gives you direction and an approach to be able to fix that problem and start to repair what's not linking together and find the missing pieces. But until you start talking about it, it's just this chaotic scene of, issues that make no sense.
Welcome to Redefine You. I'm Dan Baum. Join us as we continue to explore what happens when we're challenged to change our thoughts, beliefs, or even who we think we are. These are particularly stressful times. So many of us have heavy worries weighing us down. The pandemic, loss of loved ones, financial hardships, the need for racial justice, the political divide. How do we deal with the stress? This season, as we continue to explore the future of education, how can parents, caregivers, and educators help students of all ages identify and process the pressures they're feeling? In this episode, we talk with Diane Hallila, a counselor at Aacc, about the benefits of counseling, stress management, and embracing challenge as an opportunity to redefine. Today we're talking with Diane Hallila, Coordinator for Personal and Career Counselors at Aacc. Hi, Diane. Good to speak with you.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
How are you holding up these days?
It's been busy, but there's been so much information and resources that have come as a result of the pandemic that I guess that's our hidden blessing.
And how many are in your household, Diane? What are you dealing with personally at this point?
I have two children. One is 12, turning 13 soon, and one is 9. He'll be 10 in a few months. So one elementary school age child and one middle school child.
How long have you been at the college? And tell me a little more about what you do here.
I have been at the college since July of 2014, so I'm approaching 7 years. And my role is to coordinate the personal and career counseling department. So we kind of have two hats. We do a little bit of career counseling where we're helping students identify a career path and careers that would be a good match for them. The main thing I think that happens to come up most often is personal counseling, and that is assisting students in identifying personal issues that could be getting in the way of their academic success and helping them identify some goals to reduce those barriers so that they can succeed and graduate and move on to successful lives.
That's great. How are you providing that kind of support remotely when you can't sit with people physically in an office or on campus?
That's a great question. We are using a HIPAA-compliant virtual platform called Aacc. Basically, we just make an appointment with the student. We let them into our virtual office, and we just have a face-to-face conversation.
Do most students know that we have this available for them? How do they learn that this is here for them?
A lot of it is self-find. So they're starting to struggle with something and maybe they're aware that counseling exists and they'll go seek us out. Oftentimes we'll get referrals from faculty and staff who know that we exist.
And what sort of issues do you typically hear people dealing with or you find yourself responding to?
There's a whole spectrum. We see everything from stress, anxiety, depression. Some people are dealing with grief. Some people are dealing with just general adjustment disorder and adjusting to change. There's a lot of isolation and friendship issues where students feel they don't have a good connection to peers. Sometimes we have students come in and they're not even sure what's wrong. They just feel like something's not right. And so then the focus will be, well, let's figure out what you want to change and what's not working optimally in your life right now.
I'm curious how the volume compares to pre-COVID. I would expect it to be really up. What's it been like?
We've had an adjustment. Our numbers have been higher with regards to the overall total because we've had a lot more consultations with faculty, staff, and students. And we've had a lot more workshops where we're having access to more ears and being able to present our information. As far as one-on-one appointments go, that number stayed pretty steady. And I think that comes because some people have adjusted in a positive way to the remote environment, and maybe might be thriving by being home and feeling less stressed by having to drive and find transportation and that kind of thing. And some people have been negatively impacted and are therefore reaching out. In addition to that, I think there are a lot of students who don't feel comfortable going through the counseling process in a remote environment because they might be talking about family issues and they don't feel they have that confidential space to do so. But there are a lot of students who have reported that they prefer the remote setting. So it really is kind of a individual preference.
You know, there's just so much going on in our country and the world right now. Are people sharing what they believe to be the source of their feelings and concerns, or is it just reflective of, like you said, this full range that people may be feeling?
I think that the environment that we're living in right now is a trigger for the mental health dysfunction. There are so many different factors that are impacting people in different ways. And so because there are so many triggers that are existent around us right now, a lot of people are being triggered, but it's extremely personal for each person. So everyone's dealing with it in a different way, and everyone has different priorities and different things that are impacting them. We're not really getting a consistent, majority of the students are struggling with this. It's very individual to the person.
Well, one issue that predates COVID, but I certainly hear about, is this term helicopter parenting. Mm-hmm. What impact do you see on students college age or older?
Well, with helicoptering, it's interesting because it creates a lack of independence. It impacts your self-esteem. It does a lot that negatively impacts the student. When you are trying to create an environment where your child is prevented from feeling distress or feeling overwhelmed, you're decreasing their self-worth and their confidence, and you're sending the message that you don't believe they're capable of managing successfully on their own. And I do see a lot of students struggling with this. They will report to us that, it's frustrating to have their parent stepping in and controlling their life. But at the same time, it creates a learned helplessness where it's kind of easy to just sit back and let somebody else take over. I would say, instead of trying to prevent students or your child from experiencing these negative impacts, to empower them by allowing them to experience it. There's another term besides helicoptering that I recently just heard that's called lawnmower parent. So instead of swooping in and protecting them, they're actually mowing down all barriers that could cause distress. So
they want to be out front and just mow it all down.
Yeah. So instead of doing that, let them develop a sense of self-efficacy. Let them practice some skills to function independently. Let them fall. I like to say it's similar to not allowing your toddler to learn how to walk and not allowing them to fall. If you are constantly at their side, protecting them from that fall because you're scared they're going to get hurt, they will never learn to walk. They won't learn the balance. They won't learn to get back up. They'll kind of just have a learned helplessness. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to let them fail and let them believe that they are capable and establish goals for themselves. It impacts how they approach a problem. If your parent is always addressing your problems for you, you're not as capable of approaching the problem, establishing goals, succeeding in the tasks in general, and overcoming those challenges. And I would say that generally it leads to a lack of mastery at skills and a decreased confidence.
I would think that the parents' intentions are good. And of course, the circumstances have changed where a lot of the students are at home taking classes online, and it must be very tempting for the parents to, get involved. So what can parents do differently if they find themselves in either helicopter or lawnmower mode?
I think you have to change your language. You have to change the way that you're seeing the situation so that you can give yourself permission to not swoop in and protect. Because I agree. I think it comes from a good intention. It comes from wanting the best for your child and wanting to see them thrive. But it gets in the way of that process. And so start off by just giving them meaningful and authentic opportunities to make decisions and to succeed. When they fail, support them in that process. Help them to explore what went wrong, what could have been done differently, and be a support structure for those failures instead of preventing the failures from happening completely.
What do people gain most from coming to you and seeking counseling?
I think a sense of control over the problem. You know, one of the biggest things that students tell me when they come in, when they leave the first time, they're like, "Thank you so much. I feel so much better." And the reality is I tell them, I really just listened. You did the work. When someone comes into our offices, they're talking out loud about what's wrong and what doesn't feel okay. And by doing so, they're processing the problem and they're making sense of the problem. I have this analogy that we all have these problems floating around in our brains, almost like a puzzle. And each problem is a piece of the puzzle. And when you start talking out loud about what's going on, it's like the puzzle is being put together in front of your eyes. And suddenly the problem has a lot more clarity and makes a lot more sense and gives you direction and an approach to be able to fix that problem and start to repair what's not linking together and find the missing pieces. But until you start talking about it, it's just this chaotic scene of issues that make no sense.
And yet not everyone takes the step to seek counseling early when they would need it. What holds people back?
I think there's a stigma. We are getting better. There's a much greater sense of support for getting help and talking about your problems. And it's not looked down upon nearly as much as it was maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago for sure. But there is still a stigma. It's interesting because I've had many students come in and verbalize that, their parents don't support them going to counseling because it means that they're crazy, quote unquote. A lot of times students are given the impression that if something's wrong with you, you're not strong enough to manage it on your own, or you're broken because you need help, or these are our personal problems. You don't share them with strangers or people outside of the family. And so there's a lot of different reasons that people are encouraged not to talk about their problems. But the reality is we need to look at mental health the same way we look at other health issues. So when somebody chooses to take a pill for diabetes, it's helping to support the body's ability to create insulin and process insulin. And with mental health, it's the same thing. The brain is an organ too, and the brain is a complex organ. And sometimes our brain chemistry just gets off, and we need assistance in rebalancing and repairing those functions just as much as we need assistance with our physical health.
Well, you can't see me nodding, but this is so resonating with me because my father had a saying, family matters, stay in the family.
Yes.
And I've shared candidly on this podcast, my mother had a very debilitating disease when I was young. But one thing I haven't shared, and I very rarely, if ever, share, but it just seems appropriate here, is my father had a nervous breakdown when I was very young in response to all that was happening in the family. And it almost feels like a betrayal to say this, because he felt really awful felt ashamed. Mm-hmm. There was a stigma for sure. And it wasn't until I was an adult, decades later, that he shared exactly what happened. And instead of having the effect that I think he thought it would have, which reinforced the stigma, it had the opposite effect for me. It was an enormous relief to hear this, because he had always been the rock for the family, and to learn that he had some cracks himself, but got help and got through it, meant a lot to me. And it paved the way for me to be able to do the same. It was a real relief. So it so resonates with me what you're saying about the stigma.
Yeah, and we've all heard the saying, it takes a village, and it does. Sometimes we have to step outside of our immediate family to gain a different perspective because we are biased. One of the biggest abilities that somebody has in growing is when you get into a relationship with your spouse, in that, you have your realm of normalcy and rules of what is normal and what's not normal based off of your childhood and what you were taught, and they have theirs. And when you join families, suddenly you have to pick and choose, well, which rule are we going to have together as a family? And let's let that one go, and let's inherit this one. And suddenly you're seeing the world with a different lens, and it opens your eyes to, I think, broadening your perspective and allowing yourself a different point of view outside of your immediate family that you grew up in.
Of course, it can get very serious if people don't get the help they need. Teen or suicide among young people, it's a very tough topic, but you know that subject well. What are you seeing in our community that others may not readily see?
Well, there is a town near Arundel Community College, and I won't say exactly what town, but I will say that the NIH has done a study on it, and they named it Poplar Grove, was the pseudonym name, the anonymous name that they gave to protect its identity. But it's a well-known town, and it's very close by. It has a very successful graduation rate. I think they're at 95%. They have many sports championships. They have many students are advancing in placement, and enrollment is high. The family median income is high. I mean, it's this ideal, successful world. But the reality is that when we place this perfectionistic thinking on our young population, it creates a lot of stress, and it creates an unrealistic level of expectation. And in this town, it's resulted in a very high level of suicides, so much so that it's inherited the name Suicide High from other nearby communities within the county. Wow. They have had almost 20 suicides in as many years. So almost on average one per year. And there's a lot of reasons that they believe this is happening. Some of it is that small town mentality where everybody knows everybody. We do know statistically that suicide numbers will go up when there is a suicide that's completed within the news or within your community, because it gives this sense of awareness. And we want to encourage people to talk about it. We don't want people to stay quiet about their feelings and about suicide. And you should always ask somebody if they're feeling suicidal or if you think something might be wrong. But when you do, it has to be accompanied with some resources and some processes for help. And out of fear that it's going to create this ripple effect, they've opted not to talk enough about it. And what happens is then the teens talk about it themselves. They're not getting the resources that they need from the adults and from the professionals. And instead, they're left talking through social media with each other when there's another suicide. And it creates this sense of, well, if they did it, I can do it too. I'm feeling overwhelmed as well. And it's this cycle. So the suicide rate number goes up when there is a suicide in the media, when Robin Williams killed himself, when Kate Spade killed herself. The hotline numbers increase and the rates increase. So we know that. So we need to accompany those suicides with some very direct conversations and assistance in what to do. One of the things that AACC does that I very much endorse is many of the faculty members and departments invite us into the classroom to talk to the students about QPR, which is a suicide prevention program. And after every single workshop that I give in the classrooms, I will always have at least one, if not two, students reach out to me about their own struggles with suicide. And I think it's a powerful conversation. It's a hard conversation to have. It's very dark and heavy, and you can feel the energy in the air, but it's impactful when it's done. The students have had an open conversation. Oftentimes I'll have one or two of them say to me that they experienced something similar and they didn't know what to do. I've had follow-up emails from faculty and staff saying, I just received this email from a student whose friend at another college was suicidal, and they followed the protocol that they were taught in QPR and ended up saving that person's life. So we can say definitively that there are, at least in this last 2-3 years, at least 4 people who are alive today because of just those conversations that we had at AACC.
Wow, that's amazing. It is such a difficult topic. We were talking about stigma and people feeling or afraid that they're broken or crazy. So how would parents or the adults that are become aware of changes in behavior, how do they begin to broach the subject if they are perhaps worried themselves about the outcome? Where do you begin?
It begins with, are you okay? You can ask very directly, are you feeling suicidal? Do you ever think about wanting to end your life? Or do you ever think about wanting to kill yourself? And those can be hard words to say. Or we can ask indirectly. We can say, are you okay? How bad is it? I've noticed that you're not getting out of bed, or I've noticed that you're not participating in as many activities with your friends. I've noticed that you seem unhappy or sad. Can you talk to me about that? And begin a dialogue, letting them know that they're not alone. There's a very high number of people, statistically, 46,000 people per year in the United States complete suicide. And passively, there are 1 in 4 people have thoughts of suicide. So it doesn't mean that they're actually planning on acting on those thoughts or acting on their suicidal thinking. But 1 in 4 people think, I'd be okay if I didn't wake up tomorrow. It would be okay with me if I was in an accident and something happened to me. That's a really high number.
That's staggeringly high to me.
Yeah.
I like the way you phrased, how bad is it? Seems like a great entry point to a broader dialogue.
Yeah, I think, it begins that process of just opening up. Oftentimes we hear that people who are struggling with suicidal thinking, if they're asked whether or not they're feeling suicidal, or if they're given an opportunity to process those thoughts, they will be honest about it. I always tell students, think about how hard it is to ask this question. If you're concerned about somebody, think about how hard it is to ask them, are you okay? Or are you suicidal? And imagine how hard it must be if you're feeling that way to tell somebody, because there is a lot of judgment there and shame connected.
So you talked about coming into classrooms. You teach workshops, provide professional development. What's the primary focus that you teach?
There's not really one primary topic matter. We do the QPR suicide prevention program is a popular one amongst the students and within the classroom. For certain departments, we'll also do the mental health first aid, such as the police academy invites us in every year to do that, which gives them a quick, 8-hour program over some of the main mental illnesses and what to do if you think somebody might be struggling with one. We have, since the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of the stress management and self-care workshops, and that's happening both on the student level as well as the faculty and staff level, because I think we're all struggling with that.
Oh yeah, stress management would be important. It's 2021, and 2020 was plenty tough. So here we are in a new year. Usually it's hopeful, people make resolutions, but clearly we've started off with even more stressors. What do you advise people do differently in 2021 to help ease the stress in their lives?
I think the important thing is to make time for yourself to address your challenges. It is not realistic to assume that you're going to go through a day or a week or a year problem-free. So embrace your challenges and know that those stressors and the problems themselves are redefining. They're an opportunity for you to grow and to identify, what's wrong, what's working, what's not working. It's a chance to motivate you and to challenge you and to create new possibilities. But if it becomes overwhelming, then it kind of gets a hold and it starts to take over. So you want to be aware of what some of your coping strategies are so that you can manage them and stay in control and kind of be a step ahead. So scheduling and time in for yourself to practice self-care can be more of a proactive measure to manage your stress so it doesn't start to control you and take over. And there's so many resources available right now to do that. There are apps on our phones that you could download and then set a timer every day to check in with yourself for 30 minutes. Do a self-care activity, whether that be a meditation or listening to a podcast or exercise or talking to a friend, having a moment of relaxation with just like a glass of tea or a cup of coffee and having some peaceful music playing in the background just to bring yourself down. I love to use scales. I love to tell people, check in with yourself on a scale. When you wake up on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you? If you are already waking up at a high stress level, then take some time that morning to bring it down. Exercise is very, very closely correlated to stress management. There are many studies that support movement and stress reduction, even as equal to medication in many cases and better than medication for some people. So movement of any kind doesn't have to be a vigorous exercise workout, but just go for a walk around the block, go up and down the stairs a few times, do some stretches. Any of that is a great way to relieve stress.
Are there any practices or routines that you follow or find particularly helpful that you want to share?
I think one really good one is free writing and journaling. I always tell students and clients when I was working out in the community to wake up in the morning and take 20 minutes, 30 minutes to just write freely. We can do this on our computers, but it's better to do it free write, like with your hand, with a pen or a pencil, because it's a slower process and it allows us to dig deeper into our subconscious mind. And it doesn't need to make sense. Just write freely, let things come out, and it'll help to kind of create a pattern and more awareness for yourself for what you're feeling and what you're doing. And it's best to do it when you first wake up, because when we're sleeping, we are deeper in our subconscious mind and it might be more surface level and more accessible. Gratitude is huge. If you can take some time in the day to think about things to be grateful for, and looking, deep into the people in your lives that have made a difference. And this can be done just by looking at pictures, or it can be done by actually identifying somebody you're grateful for. But people who practice gratitude have a higher frequency of positive mood. They have better life satisfaction. They're more optimistic, and they demonstrate better prosocial behaviors. They have lower anxiety, lower depression. All kinds of good things come from practicing gratitude.
So you had talked about with stress reduction that there are apps and such, but all of this dependence on digital and on our phones can also lead to stress. Are you seeing that in students or others, that it's actually causing some stress?
Yeah, I think telling people to set some boundaries for themselves and not only limit their social media time, but also their news time. I think we were becoming pretty obsessed with trying to stay caught up with all of the information that was coming in. And it was starting, for me anyways, it was starting to take over my reality, where it's all I was looking at and doing. So I had to set some boundaries and put some limits on my phone so that I was only allowing myself X amount of time per day, so that I had a little bit more awareness of what I was doing with my time.
Of course, our theme is redefine. Thank you for using that word earlier, by the way. I want to grant you a wish. If you could make a wish that would help people redefine themselves, what would your wish be?
I think it's the belief that they have the exact tools that they need to have their ideal self exist within them. It's just a matter of believing in yourself, taking the time to find those tools and to apply those tools and to create healthy habits to start living that life.
I love that. Well, I'm going to practice a little gratitude. I'm grateful for you, Diane, all that you're doing for our students, employees, and community. It's been great speaking with you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.
Take care and be well.
You too.
Diane works primarily with students, helping them identify and talk through personal issues that can get in the way of their goals. We all respond and deal with challenges in different ways. Sometimes we get overwhelmed. Sometimes we're not even sure what's wrong. That's when, just as we might seek medical help for a physical ailment, we can turn to a counselor. There is no shame in taking that step. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we're human. We're not made to be solo creatures, and sometimes we need others to support us. Counselors can help us see our problems clearly, identify solutions, manage stress, and embrace our challenges as agents of change. They can help us see how the pieces of this complex puzzle fit together to make a rich and fulfilling life. Redefine You is a production of Arundel Community College. Our executive producer is Allison Baumbush, our producer is Jeremiah Pravat, and our writer, Amy Carr Willard. Others who help with this podcast include Amanda Behrens, Angie Hamlet, Ben Pierce, and Alicia Renahan. Special thanks to Diane Hallila. Find show notes, how to subscribe, and other extras on our website, aacc.edu/podcast. I'm your host and creator of this podcast, Dan Baum. Thanks for listening.